Hello. In my previous lectures, we have covered the functions of management and how management as a concept has evolved over a period of time. We also looked at the objectives and how to look at the goals of the organization and management by objectives. We also discussed the importance of planning, also the aspects of coordination. We also explored various dimensions of communication. Particularly, we elaborated on different aspects of oral communication. In today's lecture, we will further work on the aspects of communication, particularly the boss subordinate communication or the communication between the organization and the others, and see how communication is the core of management. As we have seen, planning is essential, planning is extremely important aspect of the management, but then we said not only planning, it is also the organizing, creating an effective organization, the order, the hierarchy, the structure. Then we also said it is coordination is equally important. So planning, organizing, coordination. So we see different individuals, different departments, different groups, different functions, different regions work together. They use their knowledge, their understanding of products and processes, they bring their attitudes, they bring their experiences, they bring their perceptions in the pursuit of achievement of the task. And that is how the communication becomes another critical important aspect of achievement of the stated goals. Oral communication certainly happens on a daily basis between the peers, between the boss and subordinates, but it is much more important to see the other side of the communication is the written communication. But even when we look at the written communication, that the basic model remains the same, that there is a sender and there is a process of encoding and there is a message and the content and there is the process of decoding and then there is a receiver and also the possible feedback. So in this lecture we will look at the concept of written communication. So at the end of the lecture you must be able to learn and understand some of the important features of the written communication, and also we will briefly look at the merits of written communication and also the limitations and applications of written communication. So as we go through this understanding of this written communication, we will also appreciate the scope of the oral communication and necessity of the boss subordinate communication on a daily basis. Let us look at the written communication. Written communication, as we discussed earlier with respect to the oral communication, it is now takes the same words but in the form of letters, memos, circulars, bulletins, reports, instruction cards, manuals, magazines, handbooks, etc. Let me spend a little time on these keywords. So the question is, the words are there, as we have seen there is a language is there, but the language in the oral communication is stated by one individual to the other, but here it takes in the form of a letter. So somebody can write a letter to the other person, which can be both formal as well as informal in the organizational context. It can be a memo. Memo are typically considered as the orders of the superior, the instructions of the superior to the subordinates or to a group of people or to a particular functionary or a head of a department or head of an activity or to any other individual. So the memos are much more formal instruction given by the authority to the subordinate or to another officer in an organization. Similarly, what we are calling as the circulars. Circulars could be, as you have seen, could be about the holidays, or it could be a common information one would like to inform to all the people, or the way the salaries are going to be paid, or some minor changes coming in the organizational functioning. So the circulars are issued to inform all the concerned people so that they have a common appreciation, common understanding of what is happening about the future events. In an academic institution, it is about the lectures, forthcoming events. In a manufacturing organization, it about the kind of some of the new standards coming in, or some visitor coming to the organization, or a new item of food being introduced in the canteen, or new menu or a new tariff announced. So these are all could be seen as a part of the circulars. Then you also have the bulletins or the bulletin boards. So the bulletin boards gives this exhibition of the notices in terms of some changes at the point of entry or exit. It could be about the shift hours or the starting hours, or it could be the break times or changes in the break time, or the allocation of people to various tasks, or it could be the allocation of people to various shift hours. So many of these things are put in the bulletin boards. So the bulletin boards is another important method of the written communication. Also you have the reports about the errors, what is coming on a daily basis at the shop floor, about the quantity, the quality, or the targets met, the targets not met, the use of a particular machine, the use of the operators. So many of these things which are in the form of statistics, in terms of the figures, in terms of the pie charts, in terms of various details, can be form of these reports. The reports could be on a daily basis, reports could be weekly basis, reports could be quarterly basis, or some of the reports are also called as annual reports. So the annual reports also could be as a part of a legal compliance, or it could be voluntary disclosure of the organization. So the balance sheets, the annual statement of profits and loss, these are all as basically could be put under these reports. And then you have the instruction cards. The instruction cards are the do's and don'ts of what one should do or one should not do with respect to a particular task or particular operation in the shop floor. So individual is guided by the set of instruction. For example, in a bank, how to open the cash and how to bring the cash to that particular cash counter. So these are all the kinds of things where people have to follow systematically day in and day out that instruction cards. Following of instruction cards becomes extremely important, necessary, and it is a part of the discipline at the workplace. Some organizations also introduce these instruction cards that before the start of the work, they must pray for the organization. They must hold the hands of the other co-workers. So they must think that they are all working towards a common purpose. So these are all some practices which also goes along with the instruction cards. Then you have the manuals. The manuals are written instructions, but also it includes several of the details, like typically a driver gets the car manuals. So it gives that instruction of what are the parts, what are the subparts, what the definition of each of the parts. So the manuals is another method of the written communication. How to operate, how to take care of a particular instrument, and in case there are dysfunctions, the methods of troubleshooting. So these are all part of the manuals, and similarly it can also have the FAQs, what people call as the frequently asked questions. So the manuals are another method of conveying complete picture of what one should do, how one should do, and what is that one should really be careful of. And then the magazines. The magazines are another method of the written communication. So the organization conveys several formal and informal happenings within the organization, like these employee magazines, or it's also called as the house magazines, provide an important forum for people to exchange some of their knowledge, some of their unique achievements, and also whatever is happening within the families. They do get listed, they do get shared through the magazines. Employee magazines provides a forum for creativity, where people write maybe a joke or maybe a small piece of understanding, or they may share some of the events. So many of these things are taken care of through these employee magazines. But I am not trying to talk about the features of employee magazines, but it is an important aspect of the written communication. Then also the handbooks. Handbooks are very close to the manuals, but handbooks also provide a guidance, a guideline towards the application of various standards, and also the definitions. For example, there are many variants of a particular product. So each of these things are noted very clearly in some of these handbooks. So the handbooks and manuals, they go very close. The handbooks are much more in detail, having all the required definitions and the explanations. So as we see, all these are illustrative examples of how organization uses different forms of written communication. Let us run through some of the details of this. The written communication generally moves downward. I think that is the perception of several people. But the other side is also true, the written communication also could be upward. So the downward and the upward communication can have the written communication. However, the upward communication, the written form, is generally discouraged. For example, a memo can be written from boss to the subordinate, but subordinate giving an instruction to the boss in the form of an authoritative communication through a written mode is normally, generally it is discouraged. It is not acceptable. It is not acceptable, and it becomes questioning of the authority itself. And that is how there are times even workers, when they have some complaints, when they know that certain things should not be done, they do not take risks of putting certain things in writing, particularly to the figures of authority in the organization. Similarly, the customers, when they are asked, they will report about the discomforts, but they do not take pains of writing and complaining. That is how it is said 98% of the customers, they do not even complain, and most of the time they switch the organization. And to get this written communication from the agreed people has been a kind of a problem of the norm, or people think it is not necessary, or they also think even if they write and send it, there may not be any consequential action. The written communication, as we are seeing, the dynamic management should encourage it by installing a suitable suggestion system or a grievance system, where workers are allowed to write grievances and suggestions freely. So the organizations and the boss subordinate communication should create that required trust. The required trust in people that they can communicate their discomfort, their discontentments, their disappointments through not only in oral methods but also in writing. So, the organizations do give rewards for good suggestions, where people can write and convey the kind of perceptions what they have about the scope of improvements in the organizational functioning. It could be about the product quality, about process efficiencies, or reduction of waste, or use of energy in the workplace, or implementation of some new tools, new practices, or whatever they have seen from other organizations. If they can write and convey to the others, I think that is what would be a good suggestion scheme would do, would encourage people to write and convey to the management and to the others. The grievance procedure is more towards conveying one's discomforts, one's unhappiness. It may be about the boss, it may be about the organization policies and the implementation of the policies. So, it is in that sense the written communication from top to down has been considered as more smooth, more effective, with less resistance, whereas there are many problems of upward communication, particularly with respect to the written communication. If you look at factors affecting written communication, there are many, but the listing is very limited. So, the written communication is only a permanent record of spoken communication. So, that is how if you see the rules of communication applies to both written as well as oral, but here the written communication becomes a kind of a record of what one has stated at a particular point of time. So, it is important to see the language, and definitely the language is open, visible. If somebody can read, can take positions on this. So, it is important to see how the language itself makes impact on the communication. So, one can see the importance and relevance of clear and complete communication. Noun, the kind of adjectives, the kind of verbs used. So, it is important that all the aspects of the rules are taken care of, the grammar is taken care of to achieve effective written communication. Many a times the punctuations are important. So, it is where you give pauses should also accompany the non-verbal communication and as well as the oral communication. So, the correct use of punctuation should not be considered as trivial, because people can misunderstand, can misinterpret without understanding the kind of pauses which are necessary. The spelling is another important thing. So, today there are many spell checks and some of the things are available, but one can also neglect what is there in the spelling. However, in the written communication it becomes very critical and important. To a good reader, poor spelling is an offense against the language. Apart from that, people also can interpret it as that it is not a serious kind of writing, or somebody makes several of the spelling errors. Either it may be interpreted as that the person may not be aware of the language, it reflects the quality of the person who is signing or who is writing. Apart from that, also creates a bad image or a poor image of the sender. So, once that poor image comes, as we have seen, that credibility of the sender gets questioned, and once that credibility gets questioned, it creates a barrier in the process of communication, and then the receiver is likely to reject that source of communication. So, that is how the good spelling is an important thing. Similarly, the sentence construction, it is the basic unit of language. It is always desirable that you use words which are appropriate, which is generally used and make sense for the other person. So it is the collection of words that has a complete meaning in its own right. So the short and sweet sentences, what people call, are necessary for effective communication. In sentence construction, it becomes much more important. We have seen in the case of domestic inquiry, where within the organization where disciplinary actions are initiated, people need to be told and people exchange the words in an inquiry process, but that also has to be converted into writing, because it can be verified at a later point of time, either in labor courts or or any other person who is initiating disciplinary actions. So it becomes necessary to use simple, straightforward, simple constructions to convey what that individual has stated, and the others also would write, yes, they are able to read and understand whatever has been written as the part of the proceedings. Style is another important thing. The style statement, what people call it as, right? The language is so versatile and people are so different. However, many a times we are able to link the individual based on the communication style. Once you are able to read few sentences, few lines, probably you will be able to say, I think this is the person. So that's where the style becomes so critical. The style is also an expression of the individual's creativity. So the good advice about style stems from the factors that improve the effectiveness of written communication. So avoid using many words when only few will do. Simple words, straightforward words. Also, they avoid ambiguity. Ambiguity coming from complex sentences and detailed descriptions with having many negative connotations to convey one positive thing. And that's the time where people are not too clear, are you talking about the negative or are you talking about the positive? And if you say this as well as that, or when people come with one problem, you give several alternatives, but also you give a very lengthy explanation for each of those things, and that too when you give it in writing, it becomes much more complex to understand and follow. So the written communication must avoid the ambiguities. When instructions are provided from boss to the subordinates, or in a meeting, at the end of the meeting when you draw the minutes should not be written in an ambiguous manner. It should convey truly what got transpired during the meetings and then the required actions. And also that you give a detailed and elaborate descriptions, and if you don't say anything at the end, again written communication becomes purposeless. One cannot get. And similarly, avoid accidental untruths, that is making too generalistic kind of a statement, making statements which cannot be verifiable, and also the avoiding jargons where it has not much of a meaning or an impact. Another dimension of the written communication is handwriting. So with the wide availability of word processor, many state this, handwriting itself is dying out. Very few people take time to write and write legibly and in paper. So the question is that there are occasions where you do make a written application, or you also write in an examination situation. So one cannot neglect the importance of the good handwriting. So the moment you see very clear, legible handwriting, it also attracts either the examiner towards the student, or when somebody reads the application, they get much more pleasant feeling. So that is how many have argued out that handwriting in written communication is an important thing to make the impact on the other. For example, the earlier model of sender receiver, when we also talked about the encoding and the decoding, because of your handwriting, that the other person is not able to understand what is that you are trying to convey. If, apart from the handwriting, if the sentence construction is also poor and the use of words, if it is not appropriate, the written communication fails, because the other side, he cannot decode. So your encoding is fine according to you, but because of the poor handwriting and the sentence and the words, it can have either negative meaning to the other person or has no meaning at all. So that's the time where one need to give importance for handwriting. So it is definitely an impact making tool on the other. So if you have a good handwriting, it's better to use your handwriting to make an impact and get that kind of a required advantage. We should also talk about a little bit about the copyright when we talk about the oral communication. In the oral communication, particularly when you publish certain things, one need to be seeing the importance and relevance of copyright. It comes into existence as soon as a work is published. So if you take someone else's ideas, what one has written already, then without giving the proper reference to the other person, if you quote extensively, if you write extensively, if you copy, then you are violating the copyrights. So the purpose is to ensure that the originator of the work is credited with, and it becomes extremely important. If you don't recognize this, it may affect your own reputation. So when you see this, one can also see oral communication to written communication. Written communication can be seen with respect to various purposes, and one of the purposes people also call it as creative writing. In creative writing means that you are writing a piece of communication for the purpose of publication, or when you are writing an advertisement, or when you are advertising to attract customers or potential applicants to the organization. So the creative writing, not necessarily only publication in a scientific or a refereed kind of a journal, but also creativity is involved at different stages of writing. So as you are seeing the written communication, so one of the things is to make that necessary preparation. So one should address possibly the following things: who are the intended readers, what are the objectives, what is the authority you are having, that, and also the readability. So in terms of its smoothness, in terms of its content, in terms of its scope. Then also you must look at the media. Where is it going to appear? How is it going to come? So today we are talking about color advertisement with a black and white kind of an advertisement. At which part of this it is going to come? And also one need to see in terms of what pictures, what diagrams, what tables, what details, what statistics also should go into it. And then checking for this, whether the whatever you are expressing, whatever the details you are providing, is it very clear or it is ambiguous. So the ambiguous words, unnecessary details need to be taken out, and the meanings need to be created through pictures, the visuals, the tables. So particularly the report writing, we have seen, becomes much more structured exercise. So the report writing comes within the organization at several occasions. it could be about the investigations when somebody has conducted about maybe accidents in the workplace, or somebody does a study of wastages in the shop floor, or it could be the opportunities of the organization with respect to getting into newer markets, or maybe buying up a particular technology. So the report writing can come in different ways at different levels. So it is important to see and be efficient, and it becomes a core of the management at any levels of management. So maybe the top management or the middle or the lower level, one need to have a good and proper understanding of the report writing. Report writing, if you see, it need to have some of these things very clearly. One, the format, the how you are going to put the thoughts through, that is whether the what kind of introduction it will have, what kind of background material you will give, how much you will give, what kind of analysis you would provide, and then how much detail in which, who is going to read. So these are all basically to look at look at various aspects to make format perfect. Then the contents, title page. So the should be able to convey within few words what is that you are trying to attempt, and also give an abstract. Also people call it as executive abstract. That means the top management or the senior management has no time to read everything. So it may be desirable to give set of keywords, and maybe in about 6 to 8 sentences what is that you intend to convey completely, and that is how the abstracts becomes necessary part of the report. And then the nomenclature, how the details which you are going to provide, the what we typically see it as the scope of the work, the highlight, then what details have you considered and what conclusions have you drawn. And very clearly that is nomenclature can also include set of definitions. Then a good introduction, and also you see the text part need to be lucid, simple, much more straightforward. And then also you will bring discussions where you are taking some perspectives. So given the alternatives, which one are you recommending? So this is where you get into the discussions, and then you also lead to conclusions based on the analysis, based on the data. Then you also give the recommendations, what one should do based on your analysis and the conclusions, or if somebody else has to do, what best can be done. And also giving acknowledgements where you take help of the people for writing, not only for writing but also for collection of data or collection of views, or for the whatever the analysis techniques which have been deployed, and all of those people who have helped, and also the references and the appendix. So one need to have a style statement, an understanding, and the details one need to have well before you start writing the reports. One need to review all the time of how much you have and what more to be collected to make the report complete. So another important thing is the writing some specifications. It is the standards, and particularly the manufacturing, the specification becomes extremely important. The specification with respect to the use of materials, use of the resources. So the specifications must not be ambiguous. Again, use minimum words and clauses, and the language should be simplified as much as possible. And in a country like India, it is much more important that the words are also used which is known, and sometimes it may be better to use the local language where people can relate to the words in the most appropriate manner. Sometimes the documents need to be created in the local language, but appropriate English words also must be put together. So one should not just give the importance to write only in one particular language. If it is agreeable, if it is necessary to use English language where in a local language document, maybe Tamil, maybe Kannada, or maybe Gujarati, it is desirable to use some of those appropriate English words. The idea is to convey, create that meaning and convey that required understanding. The question is this: getting into that optimum quality for the job rather than the highest quality. So it is not the purity of the language, particularly when it comes to the guidelines, when it comes to the handbooks, when it comes to the specifications, but to convey that required understanding. So it should define essential features, should not consider phrases such as if possible, preferred. Not many choices must be given with respect to the specification. Specification must be very clear, it should adhere to the standards, it should give unambiguous, clear instructions to the person what to follow under these circumstances. So that is how the instructions and specifications, they go together. Some of the common things are to be observed very clearly, like instructions, it is guidelines for production of anything. So that is where the the instruction also can be seen, where you have to break down the task into series of small and logical steps. You must state what could be the step 1, step 2, and describe each of the steps in the understandable language. It should also refer to the equipment and draw some suitable analogies in terms of what are the right ways of doing things. Sometimes you must also illustrate the wrong ways of doing things and avoid the misunderstandings. The instructions can also be through the use of pictures, through the use of diagrams, and also give some of the illustrations of how one should proceed step by step. One should also ensure that the reader knows what the aim of the task is, and when the task is complete, and what is supposed to happen next, if anything. So that means instruction always should start with what is the beginning, what would happen, and what is the end, and then what is the next step. So it should include tests for correctness at important stages. So that means it should also have a kind of a checklist. So come back and see whether you have done all the things. So if you have done all the things, ensure that you have followed all the things and move on to the next step. So building this kind of a checklist, asking the person who is reading your instructions or the written material to agree for all the correct steps, and then following all the steps could lead to better acceptance and also better understanding of the instructions. Now we look at the other example of this business letters. When you write business letters, then you are doing a formal communication either with subordinates or basically with the customers, suppliers, and other agencies, other stakeholders. So it is extremely important for any manager to write and convey his messages very clearly to the other stakeholders, business partners. So if you look at business letters as an example of communication, the following attributes are extremely important. It need to be very concise and to the point. Opening statement should summarize the objectives of the letter. Very clearly you need to convey the intention of the letter, and also we should finish with explicit statement of what is to be done. Action is extremely important, and what you desire from the other party, so such closure statements must come at the end of the business communication. more so with respect to the business letter. But there are minor variations according to the culture. Some cultures, particularly the Eastern culture, the Japanese, they tend to talk about few generalities before they talk exactly what they want to convey. Some other time you also see people write directly of what the contents of the business they are expecting and what is to be done. However, the three things are extremely important. You need to keep it straight and simple. It must cover exactly the subject matter on which you want to convey few ideas to the other, and the action component of what you expect the other person should do. He may just file your letter, it is only a matter for your information, or it is a matter of courtesy, or it may be a thanking letter, or it may be an acknowledging the other person's help, or you have a problem with your machine which was supplied by one of the suppliers. So then you are complaining to him that you would like to have a replacement, or you want somebody to come and attend to that machine, or you want some space to be supplied, or you want some details about how to operate a particular aspect or particular part of the machine. So it could be anything. So what is important is to convey very clearly what the other person should do, what the other person should respond to. So business letters are another important aspect of the managerial communication. As we go along, we have discussed several things about the written communication. Just to summarize, let us list out what are some of the merits of written communication. I have stated these things earlier, but to clarify our thoughts again on this aspect, the following could be stated. One of the things is that written communication is a must, and it is used to issue specific instructions and orders to the subordinates. So when you look at boss subordinate communication, it could be for developmental purposes, it could be for coaching, it may be for the purpose of guiding on a day-to-day basis, on a daily basis. These are all the things that happen through oral communication. But when it comes to the promotion, when it comes to pay, when it comes to the administrative allocation of responsibilities and duties, transfers, or you want that person to do certain things in a better way, or when it comes to the discipline, you will see that orders, the communication has to be in the written format. Written communication is more effective, more desirable. When you look at the message and the content and the characteristic of the message itself, written communication is the only way out when the message is quite lengthy and it is not possible to convey all the points through oral communication. So that means you have to give an explanation, you have to give an explanatory note, you have to detail out several parts of the product or several steps one need to follow. I think better when several steps are involved, details are involved, better to give a detailed written note. So the written communication becomes much more advantageous. However, one can club the oral communication along with written communication. So the detailed note, detailed instruction can be complemented with the oral explanation at a different point of time, or you can make the person to read and then follow with oral communication. You will also see when you want to keep a record of it. So the key word, the key thing is written communication is also used to elaborate verbal communication and to keep a record of it. So what you have conveyed to the other person, when you have stated orally, it may be or may not be understood properly and completely. So to make sure that there is a complete understanding, that you may first give a written communication followed up with oral explanations, or you may start with oral explanation, but end up with giving a written note. So, the note or a record or set of papers, when you hand it over with all the detailed explanations in the written form, that becomes much more useful, much more effective, and you are also keeping a record of the same. You will also find that written communication serves as a reliable record for future reference and can be used in legal proceedings. At times, particularly you will see the standing orders in a company. In other words, the discipline. So, what amounts to misconduct, what amounts to misbehavior, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Some of these things must be stated, must be clearly communicated through written formats. Written either could be the memos or bulletins, and some of these things would be required later on to defend before the court of law. When people make mistakes, when they don't understand, or they may plead that they were not aware kind of situations, it is better we write down the details. We also have a record of this communication. So, you will also find in some offices that the duties and responsibilities, when it is issued in a written format, they also keep what is known as an office copy. This concept of this office copy is to maintain the order within the organization, and officers are supposed to keep these copies for any future reference and in case if it is required to defend before the court of law. And also the written communication is extremely important when you are trying to initiate disciplinary actions. So, the warnings, the memo which is issued against the employee, where you have suggested for correcting certain behaviors, these things become extremely relevant and important, and written format would be the most preferable method. It does not mean that the bosses should not convey their displeasure or cannot correct the behavior of the subordinates through oral methods. Oral communication is important, is necessary. However, for certain situations, only the written communication will be the best method. You will also see the written messages are more carefully formulated than oral communication. That is why they are more clear and specific. So, the clarity and specificity are more achieved in written form, in written communication. However, while talking to the other, while using oral communication, one can be flexible, one can restate, one can give the meanings to whatever is being stated. Such opportunities are not there. That is how the oral communication to the written communication, when you see written communication becomes much more planned, words are carefully chosen and communicated to the other person. The merits of written communication, if you also see, many have talked about it as a cheaper means of communication when the parties to communicate are situated at distant places. So, in other words, if you pick up a phone and start speaking to the other, according to many, it is an expensive proposition. It is true that cost of telephone communication is coming down drastically. However, sending a mail, sending a note, sending a letter would be much more effective in certain situations. Cost effectiveness is another consideration to depend upon the written communication. Further, it is very difficult to alter the contents of the written message, because once it is stated, it becomes a record for both the parties, mutually verifiable, it is data based, it is not impressionistic, it is not understood according to the convenience of the parties. So, that is how the written communication is also advantageous, and response to written communication is generally well thought out because the receiver gets sufficient time to understand and evaluate the message. This is another important dimension. You will see that the other side need not respond instantaneously or immediately. So, they can go through, they can understand and then respond in a structured and in a fitting manner. So, the written communication in that sense will become much more formal. Sometimes it is time consuming, but it is always advantageous to keep the formal communication in the written form rather than keeping it to the oral methods only. So, the limitations of written communication, if we state, it is more expensive for communicating short messages. It also takes long time to convey the message. So, it is better to keep it to the written only. Then once a written message has been dispatched, there is little scope left to correct the inaccuracy that may have crept into it. It is not easy to correct. For example, particularly when the New Year situations, they quote the previous year, or they may quote different date and date. So, these kinds of mismatches, when it is made, then it becomes extremely difficult to convey, and if the contents are also having problems. So, it is important to give the date, sometimes also the versions of the document, so that a newer version or a newer communication can be issued. However, that is time consuming, sometimes it is costly, sometimes it can also create misunderstandings between the sender and the receiver. If the written message is poorly drafted, it may create misunderstandings and confusions in the mind of the receiver. Sometimes it is too elaborate, too lengthy explanations, and then the other party is not too clear what is that you are trying to say, and that is how the group of the people who get the circulars with confused messages may get into wrong actions, particularly in a union management situations. Management need to convey precise and clear communications to the other party, otherwise this lack of clarity can be misused to the advantage of the one party. It may also lead to conflicts between the parties that are communicating. When it comes to the union management relationships in particular, or if you are communicating with your bankers, it is important to put all the facts and figures, the expectations, and also the thoughts need to be straight and clear. The demands must be straight and clear, otherwise the problems do come at different levels. One may wrongly interpret the facts, or certain facts may not match with each other, and that is where not only the documents gets questioned, but the whole credibility of the other party. The trust gets misplaced. So, then the relationship will get affected. The communication becomes extremely important to sustain the trust, sustain the relationship, and ensure smooth functioning of the organization itself. We will also see the limitation of the written communication, where the written message gives rise to queries for clarification and elaboration, which lead to further loss of time and money. When the communication is not very clear, people have to ask questions, and the asking question means the paper or the file has to move from one office to the other. So, each of these movements would demand time and involvement of the people who have to carry the files or who have to see those files and respond to those clarifications. It will also cause for a delay, it will also cause for red tapeism, it will also cause for bureaucratic inactions, and that is how it is important to learn how to write good letters and communicate with the others in the organization and outside the organization. Otherwise, you will also see the written channels may be blocked due to bureaucratic procedures in the organization. Sometimes you must know to whom to address the letter, sometimes it is through the proper channel. So, the organizational hierarchy must also be respected in the written communication. by chance if someone is not aware, may run into issues within the organizational system. Since the written communication is generally formal in nature, one cannot make use of posture to convey one's feelings. It is extremely difficult to express your anger. Sometimes it may be easy to express your happiness. So these gestures or what could be the verbal cues possible in the oral communication, that is not possible in the written communication. So emotions cannot be so easily communicated in the written message and more so in a formal letters. So if you look at all this, the application of written communication is used effectively in the following situation. Executives give written instruction where the assignment is important. It is necessary to fix the responsibility. As we have seen, duties, responsibilities goes also along with the accountability. So when you define authority and responsibility, better it is done through the written orders. More so in a large and complex organization, written communication becomes a must. In a small entrepreneurial trader driven organization, many things are informal, it is face to face, gets exchanged on a daily basis. However, in large complex organizations, the written communication is a must and is the only means of conveying, and particularly when you convey the executive orders to the subordinates. And we have talked about the written communication is a record. It is a record for the future about the performance of an individual, which you will see in terms of the performance appraisal forms, or the punishment, or it is the transfer and such executive orders. All these things would be required throughout the career of a person. So it also acts as a record of one's service and contribution. You also see the written communication, as we also looked at earlier. The workers, the trade unions make use of written communication to convey with the management their views and to formally get the response from the management. It is called the Charter of Demands. So when the unions convey, not only they make oral demands, but also they give the Charter of Demands through writing. And it would ask for all the things whatever they want, the concessions, the facilities from the management. It is given as a kind of a notice to the management. So we have so far looked at both oral as well as written communication. So when you look at written communication, these things become extremely important. You must know the concept of written communication, and then we have also discussed the advantages and applications of written communication, and also we have seen limitations of written communication. And as we go along in the next lecture, aspect of management, that is the concept and definition of leadership, importance of leadership at the workplace, different leadership styles, and also the leadership theories, how it has evolved over a period of time.